Two neighbors moved onto the same street the same year. Same general income bracket, same age, same starter home with the same modest mortgage. They exchanged friendly waves over their matching lawns and went about building their lives. 25 years later, one of them retired at 62 with $1.6 million saved, a paid-off house, and a calendar full of plans. She travels in the spring, babysits grandchildren in the summer, and donates meaningfully to causes she cares about. She never thinks about money because she doesn't have to. The other neighbor is 64 years old and still working, not because she loves her job, because her retirement account holds $189,000. She still owes 11 years on her mortgage, and her financial advisor told her she needs to keep working until 70 to have any hope of not outliving her money. She lies awake calculating numbers that never quite add up. Same street, same starting point, same general income. Two completely different financial destinations. What happened between those two women wasn't dramatic. There was no catastrophic financial event, no crippling debt spiral, no addiction or gambling loss or medical crisis that derailed everything. The divergence was invisible while it was happening. It was made up of decisions so ordinary, so socially normal, so thoroughly unremarkable that neither woman recognized them as decisions at all. They were just living their lives. And that is exactly what makes one particular decade so devastating, not because it demands difficult choices, but because it doesn't feel like it demands anything at all. The destruction is quiet. It looks like success from the outside, and by the time most people realize what happened, the window has narrowed in ways that math cannot fully fix. Today, I want to show you exactly which decade this is, why it operates the way it does, and the specific patterns that separate people who build retirement security from people who accidentally dismantle it during the years they should be accelerating it. The decade nobody warns you about. Personal finance content tends to cluster at the extremes. There's enormous attention paid to your 20s and early 30s. Start investing early, harness compound interest, time in the market. The earlier you begin, the better. And that's all true. Early habits matter deeply. Then there's enormous attention paid to the years just before retirement, catch-up contributions, Social Security timing, withdrawal sequencing, portfolio allocation as you approach the finish line, also important. But there's a decade sitting quietly in the middle that receives a fraction of the attention it deserves, a decade where the math is both more powerful and more dangerous than any other period in your financial life. A decade where people are statistically most likely to make their most expensive decisions while simultaneously believing they've finally figured things out. That decade is your 50s, not your 40s, though the damage there matters too. Your 50s specifically because of a set of conditions that converge in ways they simply don't at any other point in your life. By 50, most people are earning more than they ever have. Career trajectories have peaked or are approaching peak. The raises that trickled in through your 30s and 40s have accumulated into genuine seniority and income. You have more money flowing in than at any previous point. At the same time, certain major expenses that dominated your 40s are beginning to lift. Children are becoming independent or soon will be. College funding peaks and then ends. You've probably been in your home long enough that the mortgage payment that once stretched you now feels manageable. These two forces, higher income and stabilizing expenses, create a margin that didn't exist before, a real financial surplus. Sometimes the first genuine surplus you've ever had opens up in your budget. Here's the critical question: where does that surplus go? For the people who retire comfortably, it flows directly into retirement savings and wealth building. They capture the surplus and put it to work during the exact years when compounding still has meaningful time to operate. For everyone else, and research consistently suggests this is the majority, the surplus quietly disappears into something called lifestyle recalibration. And lifestyle recalibration in your 50s is one of the most expensive financial events that most people will never see on any bank statement. What lifestyle recalibration actually looks like. It doesn't look like recklessness. That's the first thing to understand. Nobody in their 50s wakes up and decides to sabotage their retirement. What they do instead is look around at their life and decide reasonably and understandably that they've earned the right to live a little better. They've worked hard for 25 or 30 years. The children are almost out of the house. This is finally their time. And so the kitchen that's been dated since 2003 gets a $45,000 renovation. The reliable sedan gets traded in for a luxury vehicle, because at this point, why not? The vacations that used to mean a week at a lake house now mean international trips, premium seats, and hotels that would have seemed extravagant a decade ago. The wardrobe gets upgraded, the club membership that seemed unnecessary in your 40s starts to feel appropriate in your 50s. None of these individually look catastrophic. Each one feels earned and proportionate. Collectively, they are retirement catastrophe in slow motion. Here's the mathematics that make your 50s so unforgiving on this particular pattern. A dollar invested at 52 has roughly 13 years to grow before a traditional retirement age of 65. At a historical market return of 8% annually, that dollar becomes approximately $2.72. A dollar invested at 42 becomes approximately $5.43. The difference between acting in your 40s versus your 50s is that money in your 50s has roughly half the compounding power of money in your 40s. This means every dollar redirected from retirement savings into lifestyle expansion during your 50s costs you not $1 in retirement, but closer to $2.50 to $3. The $45,000 kitchen renovation didn't cost $45,000. It cost between $110,000 and $130,000 in retirement wealth. The $40,000 jump in vehicle expense over 2 cars doesn't cost $40,000. It costs approximately $100,000 in what that money could have become. Run that math across an entire decade of elevated lifestyle spending, and the retirement account deficit reaches a number most people would find genuinely shocking if they ever sat down to calculate it honestly. Most people never do. The 4 decisions that do the most damage. Across the patterns that separate comfortable retirees from stressed ones, 4 specific decisions in the 50s decade show up with remarkable consistency. They aren't exotic. You've probably already seen at least one of them coming. The housing expansion decision. Your children are leaving or have left. The house you bought for a family of 4 now has 2 people rattling around in it. Logic says you should downsize, capture equity, reduce maintenance costs, and redirect all of it toward retirement. Logic and emotion rarely agree in your 50s. What actually happens, frequently, is the opposite. With children gone and income at its peak, this feels like the moment to finally buy the home you always wanted. The larger house in the better neighborhood, the place with the real primary suite and the kitchen with the actual island, the backyard that finally has the space for entertaining. The upgrade happens while there's still a mortgage on the first home or right after it's nearly paid off, resetting the debt clock. The maintenance costs on a larger, newer home climb. Property taxes on the upgraded property increase, and the retirement savings that could have compounded powerfully for the next 12 to 15 years instead get absorbed by a house that will need to be sold in 20 years anyway. The families who resist this pull, who stay in the modest home or downsize rather than upgrade, capture those housing savings at exactly the time they're worth the most. The families who upgrade don't regret it immediately. They regret it at 68 when the projections don't clear. The peak income lifestyle lock-in. When income hits its peak in your early to mid-50s, there's a powerful psychological pull to finally calibrate your lifestyle to what you make rather than what you've historically been comfortable living on. You've been earning close to this for a few years. You've proven it isn't temporary, so the spending expands to meet the income. Subscriptions, memberships, dining habits, travel frequency, giving all ratchet up to reflect the income level you're now certain you've earned. This feels like balance. You've been careful for years. Now you're simply living proportionately to your success. What makes it financially ruinous is the timing. This lifestyle calibration happens right at the moment when every dollar saved has its last meaningful window of compounding power. Locking into peak income lifestyle spending at 53 means those peak earning years, the highest earning years of your entire working life, produce minimal new wealth. The money flows in at its highest level ever and flows right back out at an equally high level. The people who retire wealthy in their early 60s look startlingly different during this same period. They don't look austere. They're not driving deteriorating cars or eating poorly, but they live on what they needed 10 years ago, not on what they make today. And the gap flows directly into retirement accounts for a decade. The children's financial problems. This one doesn't get discussed nearly enough in retirement planning conversations. It should. By your 50s, your children are adults. They are also, in many cases, struggling adults. Student loans, housing costs, job market volatility, delayed family formation. The generation entering adulthood in the 2010s and 2020s faces structural financial challenges that their parents didn't encounter at the same ages. Parents see this clearly, and parents, because they are parents, want to help. The help takes many forms: co-signing on apartments, providing down payment assistance, paying off student debt, funding weddings, covering periods of unemployment, bailing out credit card problems. Each of these helps someone you love. None of them builds your retirement account. And unlike the money you spent on their childhoods when you had 30 or 40 years of compounding ahead of you, the money redirected from retirement in your 50s has a decade or less to work. The cost is disproportionate to the help provided. The most painful conversations I've seen between financial advisors and pre-retirees are parents who gave generously and helpfully throughout their 50s, depleting the account that should have been compounding furiously, and who arrive at 63 with a retirement outlook that will require their children to eventually support them. The generosity reversed direction in the cruelest possible way. Loving your children does not require funding your own poverty. That boundary is uncomfortable to draw. It is also necessary. This one is almost embarrassing in its simplicity, which is exactly why it catches so many people. In the United States, individuals 50 and older are eligible for catch-up contributions to retirement accounts. In 2025 and 2026, the 401k catch-up contribution allows an additional $7,500 annually above the standard limit, for a total contribution potential of $31,000 per year. The IRA allows an additional $1,000, bringing the total there to $8,000. These catch-up provisions exist because lawmakers understood that people in their 50s have both the highest capacity to save and the most urgent need to accelerate savings before retirement. They created a financial runway specifically for this decade. The majority of people eligible for catch-up contributions don't use them fully. Many don't use them at all. Instead, contributions stay where they've been for years, the amount set up in their early 40s and never revisited. While income grew, lifestyle grew alongside it, and the retirement contribution, which was once a meaningful percentage, quietly became a smaller and smaller share of a larger and larger paycheck. Someone earning $85,000 in their early 40s contributing 10% was saving $8,500 annually. By 53, that same person earns $135,000. If they never updated their contribution percentage, they're still saving $8,500 while earning $50,000 more. The additional capacity is being consumed by lifestyle and expenses and inertia. Systematically raising your contribution rate every single year during your 50s, taking full advantage of catch-up provisions, and treating retirement savings as the first bill paid rather than the last consideration is the single behavior that separates the comfortable retirees from the stressed ones more than any other. What the math says is still possible. Here's the part of this conversation that matters most, especially if you're reading this in your early to mid-50s and feeling the discomfort of recognition. The window is still open. It is narrower than it was at 45. It is not closed. Someone who is 52 today with $180,000 saved, earning $120,000 annually, and willing to contribute $25,000 per year to retirement for the next 13 years will accumulate approximately $850,000 to $950,000 by 65, depending on market returns. That same person contributing $12,000 per year, the amount they've always contributed, will accumulate approximately $480,000 to $540,000. The difference between those two outcomes is entirely determined by what happens to the surplus in the next decade. There is also a behavior available to people in their 50s that isn't available at 35, the ability to make genuinely large changes quickly because the income exists to support them. A 35-year-old might free up $200 or $300 extra per month through discipline and sacrifice. A 53-year-old who makes the decision to stop inflating their lifestyle and redirect surplus earnings can often free up $1,500 or $2,000 or $3,000 monthly without meaningful deprivation. The scale of potential change is different. The people who flip the trajectory in their early 50s and commit seriously to the next decade of wealth building sometimes produce outcomes that surprise even their advisors. The combination of meaningful income, legitimate catch-up contribution limits, and enough time for compounding to still operate can rebuild a retirement picture that looked genuinely concerning as recently as 50. But this requires a clear acknowledgement of what the 50s actually are. They are not the reward decade. They are not the time to finally enjoy the fruits of your labor at your retirement account's expense. They are the last genuinely powerful window for wealth creation, and how you use them will write the story of your last 25 or 30 years of life. The specific number to know. There's one number that captures everything I've described today in a form you can actually use. Calculate your savings rate. Not what you contribute to your 401k, your actual savings rate, including all retirement contributions, expressed as a percentage of your gross income. At 50, the research on retirement outcomes is fairly clear. A savings rate below 15% during your 50s, assuming a typical starting position, produces a high likelihood of financial stress in retirement. A savings rate between 20 and 25% produces reasonable outcomes. A savings rate above 25%, aggressive but achievable for many people at peak income, produces the kind of outcomes that allow early retirement or truly comfortable late retirement. Pull up your account and do the math right now. Be honest about the number. If the number is below 15% and you're past 50, that is actionable information. The single most impactful financial decision available to you today is to change that number significantly, and to do it before another year of the most important compounding window you have left passes without it. The two neighbors I described at the beginning weren't fundamentally different people. They didn't have different values or different ambitions. They weren't separated by luck or inheritance or extraordinary discipline. They were separated by what they did with one decade. One of them understood somewhere in her early 50s that the surplus she'd finally created didn't belong to her present lifestyle. It belonged to her future freedom. She said no to the kitchen renovation and yes to the retirement account. She drove the same car for 9 years. She stayed in a house that was perfectly fine. She took vacations, but not extravagant ones. At the time, it looked like unnecessary sacrifice. Her neighbors saw someone living below her means when she didn't have to. She saw something entirely different. She saw a woman who would never have to calculate whether she could afford her medications. The decade where most people silently ruin their retirement fund is the same decade where the people who retire comfortably quietly do something almost nobody around them notices. They treat every surplus dollar from age 50 to 60 as if it's the most valuable dollar they'll ever save, because mathematically, it very nearly is. What you do with that knowledge right now is entirely up to you.